part two of the People of One Fire series on the petroglyphs of Georgia. This part, we will examine the boulders where the Gold Belt trade paths cross rivers, creeks, or mountain gaps. They have distinct quality. Most of these boulders are about the same size, like an elongated potato, and they have distinct symbols on them that are not found in some of the other petroglyphs. They're all characterized by at least some concentric circles. Yuchi priests consider the concentric circles carved into stone to be symbols of the ripples in a water basin, which to them were time portals. They would look into the ripples to determine the past and the future. It's not clear if they looked into these carved concentric circles, but they definitely did look into the ripples of carved basins. The best known of these boulders is the Reinhardt petroglyphic boulder. It was found near the Etowah River in northern Georgia and in Cherokee County, where a major trade path ran along the Etowah River. But after about 6 or 7 years of our organization's operation, we realized that this boulder is almost identical to the petroglyphs of County Kerry on the southwest coast of Ireland. How could that be? But it's not just the Reinhardt boulder. The symbols on all of the Georgia petroglyphic boulders, which are carved along major trade paths, can be found on boulders or rock faces in either the British Isles or Scandinavia. There's so much we don't know about the past. Let's go back to 2012, though. In all honesty, prior to 2012, the People of One Fire, first of all, was little known by anybody but our own membership. And second, we really didn't give much thought to petroglyphs. We just generally assumed they were carved by ancestors and also assumed that they could not be understood, and there was very little publicity about them, so we just said, well, they're there, and they were done by the sample of our art. But beginning in March of 2010, the ridicule of the Creek people's migration legends by the Georgia archaeologists, U.S. Forest Service personnel, and North Carolina Cherokees brought the petroglyphs to the forefront because the largest collection of petroglyphs in the southeast is located at Track Rock Gap. Suddenly, we were all over the news, except we had no say about it. It was one-sided news where archaeologists were calling me an ignorant peon. Undergraduate students would say something like he's nothing but an architect, or he's a pseudo-archaeologist, or he's a self-styled historian. One called me a self-styled blogger or something like that. I don't know, but they never used the word architect. But it heightened our interest in everything like the petroglyphs. We really didn't understand them, but we figured we had to learn, since that seems to be a key to understanding track rock. The Track Rock site is a very large archaeological zone. It covers at least a half square mile, and now I'm learning there are more terraces elsewhere, so really the archaeological zone might be as much as a square mile or larger. The petroglyphs are located near the road, here, right here. Most tourists were completely unaware that there was a large complex of stone ruins to the southeast of the petroglyphs. They came to see the petroglyphs and they drove away. But we found there's much more here in the area. Here are the terraces, and then above the terraces are over 100 royal tombs that were dug out of the side of the mountain and then sealed with quarried rock, laid in clay mortar, and then plastered over with limestone plaster. It had a special location even geographically. This is the view of the gap from the north, from Hollander Knobs. You see it aligns perfectly with Blood Mountain. Almost immediately identified 4 Itza Maya glyphs on Boulder Six. Mako Aha Hini Kukulkan, which translates as Great Lord, Royal Son, or High King, Quetzalcoatl. Kukulkan and Quetzalcoatl mean the same thing. However, most of the glyphs on the Track Rock boulders are not Maya at all, although some people have called them that. We couldn't figure them out. We again assumed they were created by our ancestors, but it seemed a situation that could not be explained. at the time. Since that time, we've come to realize that these are Scandinavian Bronze Age symbols, very common in southern Sweden and Denmark. I've marked them on the drawings of the boulders. We will come back in part 4 to explaining these symbols, but for now, I wanted you to see how many are actually on the boulders. There's an exception. What most people assumed was graffiti actually is an extremely interesting historical find. Luby is the name typically given to the firstborn daughter of a rabbi from Eastern Europe. But the date 1715 is highly significant. That's the beginning of the Yamasee uprising, in which approximately 90% of the whites living in the interior of the Southeast were murdered by hostile Indians. Evidently, Luby had been captured, and she was letting her family know where she was, or they were fleeing and she just did some graffiti on the rock. But it's a fascinating little detail. Virtually all the symbols on Boulder Six, except 3 of the Maya symbols, can be found in Scandinavian. In fact, what I thought was fascinating is this is a symbol used even today by the Sami for a elk, and it's a very common symbol on the petroglyphs near where I lived in Sweden. The Forsyth petroglyphs are located between Cumming and Ball Ground, Georgia, on the Etowah River, where 2 major trade paths intersected. Here's the river, here's the 2 paths. They're now highways. They're now located on the grounds of the University of Georgia. This area, the mountain rivers are almost impassable by canoes. They're beautiful, but they have too many rapids and waterfalls to be major routes, so transportation relied on footpaths paralleling the rivers to go between town and town. Here's another view of the Forsyth petroglyphs. You see the concentric circles and then some other symbols, but these are not found in Scandinavia. Here's a drawing of it. These seem to be astronomical symbols. This one and this one and this one are definitely symbols of the Bronze Age zodiac. These 2 are also. They're constellations. The other Forsyth boulder is a basin, which archaeologists called a nut grinding thing. Probably not, but as my grandmother told me, she said, why would our people crack nuts and then carry all that mess back to the house? It'd be much easier just to carry the dry nuts and crack them in the house. What's more likely this is a ceremonial basin for looking into the ripples, or possibly, if Celts are involved with this, it's like the basins carved by the Druid priests in England where they poured blood as sacrifices. We don't know, and there's never been any study to look for residue within the basin. Still today, the Kogi priests in Colombia drop pebbles into the basins carved in the boulders, like this one, and then look into the ripples to determine the past and the future. The Reinhardt boulder is the best known of all. Superficially, it seems to be a collection of concentric circles. However, when you look closer there at the photographs, there's much more going on. Here's a star. There's a hexagon here. There are 2 types of concentric circles. These are roughly equal in width. These type look more like pebbles. You notice that the spacing between the circles are different. In both these locations, there are stars. This is a zodiac sign. And in another location in Boulder, we found a solar cross, which is called a sun wheel in Europe. There's a star, and then there were single dots, which probably symbolized individual stars. Then we'll move on to Nacoochee Valley, northeast Georgia, location of the USA's first major gold rush. Robert Washup found that the villages and towns in the Nacoochee Valley were first occupied around 1000 BC. Most were more or less continuously occupied until the late 1600s when there was a terrible smallpox plague. The year was actually 1696. Some of these villages were only 100 or 200 yards distant from each other, which is basically what he found was a megapolis. The best known of the petroglyphs in this valley is actually a stela. It was a large boulder that was carved in the shape of a spearhead and then vertically erected. This boulder is pretty much identical to the earliest form of rune stones in southern Sweden. I remember seeing boulders with the exact same carvings on them. They were erected vertically, as I said. Over time, as the Scandinavians developed a more sophisticated writing system, these became rune stones. But originally, they would have had abstract designs like you see here. There's another set of petroglyphs in the Nacoochee Valley that do not seem to be made by people from the Bronze Age, or at least from Bronze Age Europe. This style of petroglyph is very typical of Central America and Colombia and parts of the Amazon basin. I do not think it was carved by anyone associated with the Yuchi. Here's a boulder that's been worked on to be almost round, and again the type of details on it very typical of Central America, particularly Panama, and then the northwestern edge of Colombia. In part 3, we'll be looking at the petroglyphs that were not on major trade paths in the Georgia Gold Belt.